The movies gave you the image. Lone rider on a ridge, wide brim hat, duster coat, a name everyone knows. He always finds the man. He always gets paid. Forget that. You are a private citizen in 1881 with a piece of paper, a horse you still owe money on, and a name written in fading ink. No badge, no authority, no legal protection if something goes wrong. The man you are hunting has a rifle and nothing to lose. You have expenses you haven't calculated yet. The fantasy lasted as long as it took to read the fine print. Nobody issued you a badge. That's the first thing to understand. In 1878, bounty hunting was not a profession with a license, a guild, or a regulatory body of any kind. It occupied a legal gray zone that courts had barely touched. A Supreme Court ruling from 1872, Taylor v. Artayentor, confirmed that a bail bondsman could pursue and recapture a man who skipped his hearing using nearly any means necessary. That ruling got stretched, paraphrased, and repeated in every saloon from Abilene to Tucson until it became common understanding. Any man with a wanted poster had the right to go get his man. The law was considerably less enthusiastic about this interpretation than the saloons were. You are a private citizen, nothing more. The poster in your hand was printed by a railroad company, a cattlemen's association, or a county sheriff who had no budget for a proper manhunt. Sometimes the reward came from a bail bondsman trying to recover a financial loss. Sometimes from a merchant who claimed a man robbed him and wanted him brought before a local judge. The entity issuing the reward had no obligation to verify the wanted man's guilt. No obligation to hold the reward amount constant between the day the poster was printed and the day you arrived with your prisoner, and in many cases no legal obligation to pay you at all. The sketch on the poster was made by someone who knew the man, or thought they did. Average height, brown hair, scar above the left eye, maybe. The drawing was reproduced from a description given months ago, not from a photograph. If a photograph existed, it was taken years back. Men grew beards in the territory. They changed their names the way they changed towns. You were hunting a general shape of a person who had every reason to become someone else and months to do it. You study the poster for a long time, then you start asking questions. And the first complication arrives before you leave the county. Jurisdiction. The man you want was last seen in New Mexico territory. You are standing in Kansas. Crossing into another territory with a prisoner, or trying to acquire one, put you in immediate conflict with any local sheriff who decided he didn't like the situation. Some sheriffs respected the pursuit. Others saw an armed stranger dragging a man through their town and responded accordingly. There was no federal framework protecting you. If a sheriff decided you were the problem, you were the problem. You had no badge to show him. You had a piece of paper from a railroad company and a look on your face that said that was enough. The Pinkertons had badges, or something close enough. The Pinkerton National Detective Agency had been operating since 1850, and by the 1870s they were the nearest thing the American West had to a professional investigative force. They had retainers from railroads and banks. They had lawyers on staff and offices in Chicago, Denver, and New York. They had a network of informants that crossed every state line. When a railroad wanted a man found, they called Pinkerton first. You were not Pinkerton. You were a man with a horse, a rifle, and $40 in your pocket. That $40 had to last. Before you rode out, you needed supplies. Ammunition, 2 boxes, minimum. 3 weeks of food, hardtack, dried beef, beans, coffee. A bedroll, rope, a set of leg irons for the prisoner, assuming you took him alive, which the poster technically required. Your horse needed to be sound enough for the terrain ahead, because a lame horse in the New Mexico desert was not an inconvenience. It was a death sentence. A second horse for the prisoner on the return trip would cost another $20 you hadn't collected yet. You did the math twice on the back of the poster. $500 issued. $60 already committed to supplies, and the $2 tip you'd paid a saloon keeper who claimed to know where the man was sleeping. 3 weeks of riding in, assuming the tip was good. Then the ride back with a live prisoner, assuming he was where the saloon keeper said, assuming the saloon keeper wasn't lying, assuming the man hadn't moved on when he heard someone was asking. You folded the math up with the poster and put both in your coat. Then you stopped calculating and started riding. The desert opened in front of you. A flat hardpan broken by red rock formations the color of old blood. The sun was high and already brutal. Your canteen held 2 quarts. The next water was 18 miles south if the map scratched onto a bar napkin was correct. It probably wasn't. The map was wrong. The water was 23 miles south, not 18, and the last 4 miles were dry wash, flat, pale, deceptive ground that looked like a riverbed and hadn't seen water since spring. Your horse found it before you did. The animal stopped and wouldn't move until you let it drink. You filled your canteen and sat in the shade of a rock overhang and ate cold hardtack and tried to remember what the saloon keeper had actually said, word for word, versus what you had wanted him to say. He had said the man was working a ranch south of Tucson. He had said this with the confidence of someone who had been paid to say something convincingly. You had given him $2. It occurred to you now, sitting in the heat with crumbs on your coat, that $2 was exactly the price of a convincing lie in a Kansas saloon. 18 days in, you stopped at a small settlement, a trading post, a corral, 6 structures that might charitably be called buildings. You described the man, showed the sketch. A woman behind the trading post counter looked at it for a long time and said she might have seen someone like that. Maybe 6 weeks back, maybe longer. He had bought flour and salt pork. He had paid in coin. He had not given a name. She described him as quiet, polite, and in a hurry. That was the information economy of the Old West. Maybe, might have, could have been, weeks old. Shown you paid her 50 cents for the flour you needed and filed the information alongside the other fragments. A direction, a time frame, a man who bought salt pork and didn't linger. You had 3 weeks of this. Small settlements, dry camps, a night in a town called Benson where nobody knew anything or claimed not to. The trail was not a trail. It was a series of guesses connected by riding. You found him on day 26. Small ranch outside a place called Contention City, maybe 15 miles from the San Pedro River. He was splitting wood behind the main house when you rode up. He saw you, and he knew. Men who are being hunted develop a sense for it. He dropped the axe and ran for the house, and you covered the distance fast enough that he didn't make it inside. He stopped at the door with his hands up, looking at your rifle. He's doing the same math you had done 6 weeks ago in Kansas. He decided the math didn't favor him. He sat down in the dirt. Here's where the movies cut away. Here's where it gets complicated. He was alive. The poster said alive. That meant leg irons, rope, your own food rationed to cover 2 men, and 400 miles of hostile territory between you and the closest place authorized to receive him. He did not want to go. This was not a philosophical position. This was a practical, physical, daily fact for the next 3 weeks. He tested the rope on the 2nd night. He tried to negotiate on the 4th day, offering you half the reward in cash he claimed was buried somewhere he would reveal if you let him go. You declined. He tried to bribe the horse, which did not work, but you appreciated the creativity. But the legal exposure was something you had not fully calculated back in Kansas. If he had drawn on you and you had shot him, you would have needed witnesses to establish self-defense. There were no witnesses in the desert. A dead man with a bullet in him and a bounty hunter with a rifle and a financial motive was a situation that at least 2 territorial judges had found suspicious enough to pursue. A man named Heck Cantrell in Arizona Territory had shot his quarry in 1876 after the man drew first, brought the body in over a saddle, and spent 4 months in a Prescott jail while the county attorney decided whether to charge him with murder. The county attorney ultimately declined. Cantrell got out of jail, collected a reduced payment, and left Arizona permanently. He never worked a bounty again. You reached Tucson on day 41. 41 days. Your prisoner was alive, filthy, and loudly insistent on his innocence to anyone within earshot. You located the Territorial Marshal's office on the main street. You presented your poster, your prisoner, and your documentation of the capture. The deputy on duty looked at all 3 items with the expression of a man opening a bill he did not send for. He told you the reward had been reduced. The railroad had renegotiated the bounty 2 months ago. The new figure was $300, not $500, $300. The revised posting had gone out by telegraph. He seemed to find it unreasonable that you had not received a telegraph in the desert. The deputy processed your paperwork without enthusiasm. $300. You signed where he pointed. And he handed you a receipt and told you the payment would be issued by bank draft within 30 days. You walked outside into the Tucson afternoon and sat on a low wooden step and counted what you had spent. $60 in supplies before leaving Kansas. $2 to the saloon keeper in Dodge, 50 cents at the trading post, feed and water for 2 horses at the stops where it was available, 1 night's lodging in Benson, ammunition you had not needed to use, which was its own kind of luck. When you finished counting, the number was $94. 300 minus 94 is 206 for 41 days, across 400 miles of desert and back with a prisoner. You thought about that number for a while, then you got up and went to find dinner. The men who made this work really made it work, year over year, on enough to build a reputation, were extraordinary in ways the posters never captured. Bass Reeves was a deputy marshal out of Fort Smith, Arkansas, and he was perhaps the most effective lawman in the Indian Territory during the 1870s and 1880s. He made over 3,000 arrests in his career. He was never shot in a gunfight. He used disguises, patience, and a precise understanding of how men on the run think. He was also black in a territory where that created obstacles that had nothing to do with the men he was chasing. History mostly forgot him until recently. The dime novels were not written about Bass Reeves. Tom Horn worked as a scout, a Pinkerton operative, and eventually an independent bounty hunter and range detective in Wyoming. He was effective. He was also hanged in 1903, convicted of killing a 14-year-old boy in a case built substantially on a disputed confession. Whether he did it remains argued. Pat Garrett tracked Billy the Kid across New Mexico for months, found him in a dark room at Fort Sumner in 1881, and shot him dead. He collected his reward. He was later shot himself in 1908 in a dispute over a land lease on a New Mexico ranch. The argument was about goats. The mythology came from somewhere else entirely. The dime novels started in the 1860s and accelerated through the 1870s and 1880s. Cheap paper, cheap ink, fast stories about men named Deadwood Dick doing things that bore an approximate relationship to events that had actually happened. Publishers in New York understood that the West sold. Danger sold. The lone figure with a rifle and a code sold. Buffalo Bill Cody took it further, in constructing an entire theatrical spectacle that toured the country and eventually Europe, presenting a version of frontier life that was exciting, bloodless, and largely invented. Sitting Bull appeared in it for 1 season. He found it baffling. The audiences found it thrilling. This is the version that survived into the next century and the one after that. The men who didn't survive into legend left nothing much behind. A line in a county record, a grave marker if they were lucky. Most bounty hunters who operated in the 1870s and 1880s have no biographies, no entries in any archive a casual reader would find, no statues outside county courthouses. They rode out, found the man, or didn't, collected or didn't, and disappeared back into the enormous ordinary mass of people trying to make a living in a place that was indifferent to the attempt. The system that used them was rational if you were the system. Governments and private interests, railroads, banks, cattle associations, needed enforcement but didn't want to fund it reliably. Bounty hunters provided enforcement on pure commission. No fine, no pay, no expenses reimbursed, no legal protection if the pursuit went wrong, no pension at the end. The risk transferred entirely to the man with the poster. The institution absorbed the benefit and externalized every cost. It was, in its way, an elegant arrangement. Elegant for everyone except the man sleeping in the desert on day 19, rationing his coffee, wondering if the saloon keeper had been telling the truth. And you ride back to Kansas with $206 and 41 days behind you. The territory looks the same, going north, as it did going south. The horse is tired. You are tired. The man in Contention City was guilty of something. You are reasonably sure of that. The railroad that cut your reward is already laying new tracks somewhere and has forgotten you exist. You stop at a waterhole on day 3 and sit in the late afternoon light, and you don't feel like a legend. You feel like a man who did a hard job for less money than it cost him, which is mostly what you were.